This is a bonus episode of the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lay.
Chris, I know that you're new to real estate investing, but have you bought any properties yet?
Yeah, so I just got started. I have one, and my goal is to get to about $8,000 a month.
All right, well, here is the game plan for today's bonus episode. I'm going to hand the podcast over to Caeli Ridge. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, I'm sure you know Caeli. She's been on the show a bunch of times in the past. Caeli is a lender and she's also an investor. And one of the services that she offers her clients is that she figures out what their goals are and she helps them get there. And on the podcast today, we're going to listen in as Chris and Caeli talk. And Caeli is going to show Chris exactly how he can go from one rental property to $8,000 a month in cash flow. So what we'll do is we'll take a really quick break. We'll thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll listen in on Chris and Caeli. I want to let you know about a really easy way to track your rental income and expenses. It's an accounting software custom made for rental property investors. It takes just seconds to enter an expense or to record that you collected rent. It makes tax time really easy. Just run a report and give it to your tax person and you are done. They're currently offering a free 30-day trial. There's no credit card required, so if you don't like it, there's nothing to cancel. You can learn more and sign up today at rentaltrial.com. That's rentaltrial, T-R-I-A-L, rentaltrial.com.
Rental Income Podcast.
Before I hand the podcast over, I just want to point out that Caeli is a sponsor of the podcast, but she's not paying to be here today. Caeli is just here to help Chris out and help him build his rental portfolio. With that being said, Caeli, take it away.
So for right now, what I want to do is I want to come back here and let's just dig into the goals a little bit, Chris, and further expand on some of your short and your long term. As you can see here, I started to take some notes with Dan. So if you want to just confirm this, and then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive. So we want to harvest equity in your primary residence. That OO you see here stands for owner occupied. So you've got equity there. I think, Dan, you said you have a HELOC, Chris, right?
Yeah, I do,
okay. Yeah. Perfect. So we want to grab at that. We want to go and then pay cash for investment properties and then turn around and refinance, harvest that back out and pay off the HELOC and then rinse and repeat, kind of like a Burr method.
Right. Yep.
And then we're $8,000 net per month is the number that I got from Dan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Quick question for you on that, Chris. Is that total replacement of your current income, or is it kind of a supplementation that will allow you maybe more freedom to pick and choose how much you work?
Exactly. Just like I'm still going to work, just a total, it gives me a little bit more freedom. If I was to maybe something happened, God forbid, and I didn't work for 2 or 3 months, right. At least I know I had that money coming in.
Because do you love what you're doing? Do you like your job?
Yeah. I don't love it, but yeah, I like it.
Okay. Not full replacement. Okay. Got it. And then in terms of acquisition, I also got from Dan about 1 or 2 purchases per year. Does that sound about
that would be the
speed?
goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I want to ask, what is your timeline for this? I mean, I don't know if you've worked the math backwards at all and kind of understanding how many doors based on the property type you're looking to purchase you have to acquire. So if you were to look at this from a big picture, like that $8,000, in what span of time do you want to accomplish that?
My goal for the $8,000 would be in 5 years or so. Because what I'm trying to think is when we can talk a little bit more on the call is I guess I have to wait 6 months because you get the 10 golden tickets I've heard you mention before. So I'd have to wait 6 months to get my money back. Yeah.
No, that's not accurate. That's only accurate so that's kind of the cool thing with Burr. So I'm going to just add in here to my notes. Delayed, it's called delayed cash out refi. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Based on certain rules or guidelines to the product on a conventional basis, Fannie Freddie, which is what we're going to spend our time talking mostly about. I think you're probably aware that we have a very diverse product line that go well beyond the Fannie Freddie, but for your purposes, this is kind of where we're going to live for a minute. But Fannie Freddie has a delayed cash out refinance that allows the individual speed, no seasoning required, to get their cash back out if they meet the certain criteria, which I'll share with you in just a second. The reason that Fannie Freddie came up with delayed cash out refi is so that the little guy could actually compete in hotter markets, right? You've got these big, huge hedge funds, billion-dollar hedge fund players in there, and the sellers always want to go for the cash purchase. That's the one they're probably going to accept over somebody that's getting financing. So Fannie Freddie said, if you do this, this, and this, a delayed cash out refi for investors can allow you to compete a little bit if you have the cash to offer, and you can get it right back. You don't have to wait. Property types. Have you kind of thought about if you want a single family focus, 2 to 4 unit, long-term rental, short-term rental? Have you kind of
maybe like mainly single family long-term rental?
I'm going to just put an asterisk here and say we'll discuss 2 to 4 and some short-term. And the reason that I do that is I think that overall, my primary piece of advice for my clients is that coming up with a good balance, balanced portfolio. Okay.
Yeah.
So while our focus,
like a short term, would that be considered like an Airbnb type property or like a vacation style?
Yeah. Or, another thing that's really kind of coming up on the mainstream, I'm seeing it a lot more, is traveling professionals. Right. Nurses is a great example, right? Where in certain markets, they just need a crash pad, man. And I'm feeling like, for wear and tear on the property, that might actually be, if you're in the right market, right? And you've done your due diligence, that might be the better option, because wear and tear on the property on a vacation rental is going to obviously be quite a bit more costly than if you just have those white collar professionals that are doing their traveling and, like I said, crash pads. So we can come back to that. We'll talk about it. I do think that my advice, while, I've got some experience here, I think you're probably familiar with my background. It's my 1.3 cents worth, Chris. Take what you want, leave the rest. I'm here to provide information so you can make the most informed decision. That's really the goal.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So anything else about your short or long-term goals that you want me to have in these notes?
Probably like a long term would be like coming up with a plan after I did, hit the 10. I guess the other thing is too. So I have a fiance she doesn't have credit because she's from Bolivia. So what is it worth having her buy property without me on it? You know what I mean, et cetera. That would be like another question I would have.
So, okay. So when you're married, if she's your fiance right now, she's not a citizen, or is she a citizen?
She's not a citizen right now. No.
So once you become married, she'll be a citizen. Will she have any income?
Yeah, she works now. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, absolutely. In that case, then instead of having 10 golden tickets, you'll have 20 between you.
Right.
And really kind of fine tuning the strategy to make sure that we sequence it appropriately so that we're maximizing your 10 and then her 10 based on the qualifications, I think is a great play. It just opens up more opportunity. Right. And then we'll talk about phase 2 and what products might be available after the conventional 10. I'm feeling really bullish about lending from a real estate perspective now that we're starting to see the tides turn as interest rates go up, and the Feds, right? Fannie Freddie are really the ones that hold the market for mortgage-backed securities, right? And the 30-year fix is really starting to creep up, and the Feds have been very clear that to stamp out inflation, they're going to keep going, and I believe that to be true. So the availability of credit related to mortgage products is going to start opening up. We're going to start seeing more adjustable rate mortgage options, which I am a huge fan of. We'll talk about that later. Interest-only products, also a big fan of. So phase 2, there's going to be a lot of opportunity and a lot to choose from.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So real quickly, and then we'll get into some of the kind of goal planning, at least for this year, and then we can look into the next year and the next year and next year. There are a lot of things that we consider in underwriting when we're qualifying an individual specifically for an investment property under conventional guidelines, loan terms. But the top 3 things that we're going to focus on our discussions are going to be credit and assets and debt to income ratio, or DTI. I'm going to save DTI for another call. If we have time today, maybe we'll get through the credit and the assets. Normally, I like that to be on the first call, but I think we're really going to do more of the planning today for the podcast purposes. I'm going to give you quick thresholds, and then I'll give you definitions later, and then we'll go into the optimization. Okay, so it'll kind of be a 3-parter for each one of those things: credit, asset, and debt to income ratio. So we'll start with credit. So currently your middle credit score is 673. I do want to, on our next call, when it's you and I want to go through your credit report and look at it. Right now, this is great, perfectly fine. The rules are that in the 10 golden tickets, 1 through 6 of those 10 don't have a hard and fast for minimum credit score requirement. When we move up the chain and we get into that 7 through 10, they raise the qualification bar, and you must have a minimum middle credit score of 720 or greater. Now we have time, right? We have time to figure out how we're going to get there. And in your case, your credit's great. There was a few blips back in, it looks like late 18, early 19.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Since then, it's been perfect. And in that case, because everything else is really above par, the only thing we're going to be able to do is time. And the more time that we put between then and now, the better the score is going to do. There's some other things I can show you, but for right now, it looks great. Just keep in your mind that once we kind of get to that number 5 or number 6, we're getting close to 7 through 10. We'll want to take a look. By then, I think we'll be there, but just that's the deal. Okay. Okay. Assets. So what I show here for assets, and this is one of the attachments. I think we'll talk about the visual aids next time, Chris, for sake of trying to keep this concise. So I didn't see the HELOC in my system, so I'm going to go there in a second. I show that we have about 78,000 all in for the accounts that you gave us. Does that sound about right?
It should be more than that. Yeah.
Okay. Then probably what happened is that based on the statements that we have, either they didn't list them all because we probably didn't need them, or maybe we didn't get them. In any case, I'll go back through and update that just to reflect more accurately. But we can use those because there's 2 ways in underwriting that we're going to need to quantify assets. Your down payment, which we know is coming from the HELOC. Okay, I'll get that information from you. But then also there's a reserve requirement that we have to facilitate. There was a page that Carly sent you that kind of goes through the metric of that. Similar to credit, the amount of reserve changes. Actually, it increases the more finance properties you have. Right. Gotcha. Okay. So this looks sufficient for if we're talking about properties in the $100,000 to $250,000 range, this probably would get you all the way to 10. Right. But we'll come back and be real specific on that later. Let's talk about that HELOC. I see a mortgage on your primary residence, but I don't see the HELOC statement. Let me just show you what
probably by the time we'd originally talked, I hadn't used it yet, but I just used it to buy the one that I bought.
What is the current balance, sir?
$129,000.
Okay. Do you know what the minimum payment is by chance?
Like $200.
Okay. And what's the limit? What's the credit limit?
The limit's $200. So I used that money to buy the house in Memphis.
Perfect. Oh, and that's the one that was closing on Monday, right? I had a note.
Yeah, that's the one that I bought. Yeah, I paid like $126,500 for that. Yeah.
So that will be our first order of priority, is to get the cash back out of there, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. So let me switch gears a little bit and let's talk through that, because if the value of the property is 125, when we get to it, the appraisal is going to tell us that, right? We're going to give you 75% of what 125 is, or whatever the value is. In our case, we're going to go 125 times 75%. All right, so 93,750 minus closing costs, maybe end up with about, taxes and insurance and closing costs and everything. Conservatively, let's say 85 grand. Okay. Right. So 125, I can't do mental math, you guys, minus 85,000. So you're going to have 40,000 left on the line that I assume you're going to be using, and tell me if I'm wrong, the cash flow of this property, you're not going to be using it for your living expenses. You actually make a pretty good living. You're going to use that to repay the 40.
Yeah. See, that's the thing I was going to ask. I've already been taking extra money and paying down that HELOC.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's my goal was to just take the money I was making and start paying down the HELOC again, the 40 or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, why not use the more use of other people's money, the better. I would recommend for that. Depending on speed and goals and things. So we also will need a statement for that too, Chris. When you have a chance, I want to see the closing disclosure, etc. Okay. The rents for this are $1,000 a month.
Yeah, like $1,050.
Okay. All right, 1,050. We want to get to 8,000. We want to do it by some combination that favors the single family in the long term. Do you know what markets? That's what I forgot. Do you know what markets you're going to be mostly focused on?
Probably like like Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas, those type of markets.
And what about price point? Kind of in that same vein, 100.
Yeah, like up to like 200, probably. Yeah, up to 200,000. As long as the numbers make sense,
I think that there are some misguided ideals about fixed rate mortgages. And the reason for that is just sheer statistical data. Right. Firstly, the percentage of people that start with a 30-year fixed mortgage and keep it 360 months later, payments later, is less than 1%. Okay?
Yeah, I would say probably not very many.
Not very many. They're buying or selling or refinancing, whatever it may be. They're not holding those mortgages for the full 30 years. We know that statistically, owner-occupied, the property you're going to live in, generally that shelf life is about 7 years. So non-owner occupied is we estimate 5 to 6. They don't have as much data on the non-owner occupied because it really is a much smaller piece of the pie. When you look at all the mortgage-backed securities that are bought and sold on that secondary market, about 3% of them are for non-owner occupied. So they don't really track that data as much. Anyway, so if we assume that you're going to have on average as an investor a mortgage for 5 or 6 years before you're selling and maybe doing a 1031 exchange, or you're doing a cash out refinance to harvest that equity, borrowed funds are non-taxable, and redeploy it, right? 5 or 6 years is where we kind of benchmark that. So knowing that, the 30-year fixed mortgage kind of becomes a dinosaur in that vein, right, because it's you're not going to have it. And if the interest isn't, the other thing to remember about the 30-year fixed mortgage is the first 10 years of that loan, 99% of what you're paying is what? Interest, right? Yeah. If you've ever looked at an amortization table, you know that you're not even paying principal really in any significant way until the back end of that loan. Hence, I can kind of segue into the interest only. The interest only is really going to give you a leg up on the cash flow, especially in that rising rate environment. So a 5-year ARM on an interest only basis may be a play. I'm not saying in every case, but may be a play that will propel the ultimate goal.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So as an example,
that makes sense. I think what happened was the mid to late 2000s, that crash kind of scared a lot of people away. They think, oh, you got to do that only. But yeah.
Right. Well, and here's some of the more of the background on it. So 0809, right, the big one. Before that, ARMs were mainstream. We were on a normal yield, which means that an adjustable rate mortgage rate was of half to a full percentage or even more lower than a 30-year fixed, right? And that's why you would do an ARM, because the rate should be lower. Well, since 0809, we've been on an inverted yield, which means that for the last 12 years, the 30-year fixed rate has been significantly lower than an ARM.
Right. Yeah.
That the tides are turning. That's about to change. The ARMs are coming back. Interest only is coming back in this rising rate environment, the 30-year fixed rate environment. So we'll be back in a situation where it makes sense to consider it at least.
Okay. Perfect. Gotcha.
So I'm going to give you the example between the two. We are at 6.75. Whoops. On a 30-year fixed, what did I say the principal and interest was, Chris?
You said about like 680 or something. Yeah.
608.
608, yeah.
Okay. Now, if I take an interest only, the interest rate's a little bit higher. This is an ARM. So technically, I said the ARM rate should be less, but because it has that interest only component, it's actually a little bit higher at 7.25. The principal and interest is 566. Now, it doesn't sound like a huge number, but it's that cash flow that will either help you repay your line of credit, or you can stockpile, whatever. I think that it's something on a per property basis we should be discussing. Okay. All right. So if we figure, let's just real quickly start to create this roadmap a little bit, and then I'll wrap it up. Okay. If I have $8,000 that I know that you want to be netting inside 5 years, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say that right now on a 30-year fixed mortgage, single family residence, the average cash flow nationally, I'm taking averages of taxes and insurance and rents, all of that stuff today. And remember, rents are going to appreciate, right? There's other layers in here that you and I will drill down into. But let's just say it's 225, right? It's come down. And I have 8,000 divided by 225. my easy math is going to be, you're going to have to get 35.5 single family residences to accomplish that with leverage. Now that sounds like a big number, right? So here's where I would then start to discuss, how are we going to diversify your portfolio so that we can layer in some of those 2 to 4s that should really increase the monthly cash flow. Then we're going to layer in maybe some short-term rentals that will also increase the monthly cash flow so that that 35 number can be more realistic in probably, 15, 20 properties.
Yeah.
Right? That would be, and those are all with leverage. Now, there may be another phase that we want to consider where, let's say you get to your 10 in the next 2-3 years. Okay. That might be a little aggressive. We're going to have to wait and see. But let's just say that we can get there in 3 years' time. Then if you really are not interested in the 2 to 4 or the short-term rentals, we can look at acceleration of mortgage debt. Okay. We could look at taking the sum of the cash flows, the net cash flows, and attacking one property at a time. Now, this is not a popular strategy or philosophy with most investors, right? Leverage is king. Money is still cheap. We've got 30-year amortizations that most of the world do not have access to. But if you just want to get in and get out, you could look at taking the cash flow that you have, attacking one property at a time. And within that amortization table that I mentioned earlier, there's a snowball effect that can come into play where you can rapidly accelerate the reduction or payoff of these mortgages so that, 10 free and clear properties would get you there, right?
Yeah,
or
definitely.
Maybe, Chris, it's a combination of all of those things is probably what I'm going to end up recommending when we start peeling back these layers.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely got me excited talking about it, like thinking about the idea of it,
Good. I'm glad.
Mhm.
We've got some wood to cut, but so I think that what we do for now is let's get through the first one and start looking at the different markets and the numbers associated. I would open you up to looking at maybe one of the things I'm really interested in right now, and it's a newer model, is looking in, and I don't think I mentioned this, the markets that you mentioned of those 3, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Texas, there's only one of them that would be applicable to producing both reasonable cash flow and appreciation. Tennessee and Arkansas are not going to be appreciating states for the most part. Okay, there's always exceptions to every rule, but Texas, of those 3 states, is generally a state that's going to see some appreciation and some decent cash flow. I think a good balance of that would be great. I kind of diverted my thought process because I was going to get into maybe a new construction fourplex in a Florida market, right?
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Under which a single family residence in Florida for a long-term rental probably won't give you the cash flow that you expect. Okay. A 2 to 4 in Florida might get you there. A short-term rental in Florida will probably get you there. But what if we could kind of come up with a hybrid that says a new construction 2 to 4 unit in Florida where half of the units are long-term rental and maybe the other half are for short-term rental. So I really want to kind of keep it open and fluid to all possibilities. I think you even said that yourself, so that we're maximizing what returns you can find, and we'll get you to the finish line as quickly as possible.
It sounds like you've got a pretty good plan here, Chris. So I know that you've wanted to do rental properties for a while. How do you feel about everything after talking to Caeli?
Anyways, long story short, like I kept wanting to do an investment. I thought it'd be very difficult. And then I contacted just, the first bank I found, whatever, just went online to PNC, and then they gave me the equity line. And then I was completely shocked that I just went and bought like a property. And then Dan, I'd heard on your podcast, your company, Caeli, and I was like, all right, well then let me contact them. And so like anyone that's like scared or something, or you're like, to me, I'm sitting there thinking, I don't have $150,000 just sitting around, under my mattress to go buy a property. So to be able to use free money and all that, like it's definitely been like shocking, like how easy. Now, of course, you do have to do some work and get all your paperwork together and make sure your credit's a certain way, but like it's cool to like get a plan together, and it's definitely like any listener, you should definitely like look into it and don't overthink it or be scared. The worst that they can say is no, and then you just get a plan together,
Right. So the level of entry, what I'm hearing you say, level of entry was much easier than you expected it to be.
Yeah. And I'm not, trust me, anybody listen, I'm not sitting here, with the pension or, if money just coming in left and right, you know what I mean? Like I work obviously a full-time job and everything. So it's definitely, the level of entry is a lot more easier than I thought it would be.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. And I think going forward, actually, I will say just to prepare people, as you amass more properties, that paper pushing is going to get a little bit harder. But other than that, I think you're right, Chris. I think that just the unknown of finance and the language and all that stuff is more intimidating than it really necessarily is. So I think it's cool to hear you say
a lot of it too is like relationship building, like you talk to you and then you can say, hey, I can help you with that. It's just finding the right people. That's why Dan's podcast is good.
Yeah. Cool.
If you're interested in having Caeli do a customized plan for you, or you've got any questions about financing, you can contact Caeli at 855-74-RIDGE or go to her website, ridgelendinggroup.com. Thank you so much for checking out this bonus episode. I'll be back with a regular interview on Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.